This was the scene, of course, the horrific scene that unfolded last year on the Danforth shooting. 2 people were killed, 13 others injured. Well, today there will be a rally at the Danforth Music Hall. Many of the victims from that night and their families will be there calling for an end, for more action on gun violence. Joining us now to discuss that and several other issues is the Chief of Police, Mark Saunders. Chief, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good morning, Roger.
Your reaction to their call. What can be done? What is being done?
Well, I have no idea to begin as to the horrible loss that the families, the Fallon family in particular, had the opportunity of meeting them. Fantastic people. It was an ugly and dark day in the city of Toronto, but what it does speak to is that there are issues concerning gun violence, as in every urban city. It has direct impact on some people, and hopefully these are platforms and opportunities for lawmakers to listen to the concerns and figure out what can be done from a realistic perspective to do anything from a police perspective to stop people that are motivated to shoot other people.
Is it more officers on the street? Is that the solution, or is it something that goes higher than that? Social programs and stricter gun control?
Well, it's very complex, and I heard Minister Blair talk to it and say everyone has to be engaged in this. There is no one-stop solution, and I fully support that. So looking at that front end, that investment piece in these young men that are committing these acts using guns because they just don't have the capacity to understand the impact that it has long-term. We're the law enforcement stream in the middle. Once you've shot somebody, we have to be engaged. The back end speaks to the deterrent factor. Those are necessary components, but then you've also got the high risk versus the at risk. You have to have the right programs and the right funding to deal with those two streams. And then last but not least is what elements do we have to reduce the ability of getting access to firearms, which is harder and harder every day.
But they're still being found, and a lot of them are now coming from in Canada, too. They're not even, we always talk about all them being imported, but a lot of them are coming from Canada.
They are, Roger, and I say it's a brave new world we live in. No one seems to speak to the 3D guns that are being printed as well, too. So that access piece is now going to be a very easy thing. So we can do all of the things we can do to make that reduction, but we also have to live in a world that is exponential. So if somebody wants a firearm, it is going to be a very easy thing in the years to come. So those investment pieces to what I spoke to, I think will become much more critical in the later on narratives.
And your thoughts on the decision this week regarding Christopher Husbands, the shooter in the Eaton Centre, where 2 people were killed, 7 others were injured, PTSD playing a role, and he was found guilty of manslaughter as opposed to second-degree murder. Does that concern you? I think the bigger picture has concerns. I won't speak to the sentencing. It's still before the courts. But what I will speak to is what I've spoke on many occasions, which is when people have committed criminal offenses and they are given conditions, and in this particular case we're talking about house arrest and not to be in possession of firearms, both those things were breached. And so if the whole picture is brought into equation, and I'm sure that might be factors when it comes to sentencing, I don't know, then maybe there's an opportunity to have a healthier discussion, recognizing the role that mental health does play, but also when it comes to violence. We're talking the Eaton Centre. We're talking people that are still going through severe issues. I spoke with the family, the young man that was a victim of that. He had no reason to be involved in this, had no reason to be hurt by this. And so there is a balance in which the community needs to say, listen, we need to have some fulsome discussions on what needs to be done with people that are going to be shooting people, especially in open spaces. Do we have the ability to even reach those people? Earlier, when they say, well, he's suffering from PTSD, can we even reach those people? Do we have the social programs to reach them?
Well, now we're talking high risk, and so that's another discussion. I'd love to have that discussion. I don't think there's enough of that. But when we talk about who we need to reach, it's the lawmakers. We will enforce the law, and whatever the law is, we will work with it because we have to do that, and that's the right thing to do. But when it comes to changing law, it's the governments that need that. And I can tell you from a healthy perspective, all levels of government, the federal, provincial, as well as the city, have all taken a very strong stance and have been incredibly supportive with law enforcement to figure out what we can do collectively to reduce the gun violence issue.
Okay, and the board, yesterday, Police Services Board, Bruce MacArthur, they want to include that in the investigation into how missing persons cases are handled. Your thoughts on that?
Well, the board took a real strong proactive action to say, look, we're not just going to sit here and wait for things to happen. And so they made notice to the provincial government. And I just received word a little while ago. The provincial government has said, look, you know what, you guys can take care of it. So the board understands the community concerns and also has a bit of an understanding of the investigation and the steps that the men and women of the homicide squad and the other 51 division, the roles that they played. And so
I believe that with Justice Epstein's review, there'll be an opportunity to figure out how we can satisfy the court of public opinion and the community's concerns, as well as the obligations for us as law enforcement. I've got to tell you, the case and the officers, I think, did a fantastic job. It's not really fair when people will read one page of thousands of pages, hundreds of thousands of pages in their memo books and notes and reports that they have the knowledge to, that can answer to those questions. And so let's not reach to snapshot decisions or ask those snapshot questions for the gotcha. Let's be holistic about this. Let's look at this whole thing in accordance to law, community concerns, and figure out where we can learn and grow collectively.
Because there's some concerns that case wasn't handled properly and the lead investigator was being offered up as a bit of a sacrifice for it. Do you think it was all handled well, though?
The case was handled well, and I don't see any moments where Inspector Idzinga was being a sacrificial lamb. You might be talking about another issue which deals with a tribunal issue, and that tribunal issue gives that officer the opportunity to explain what was done with the information received at that time, and I want to make sure that we strike a balance that forum is not tainted in any way, shape, or form. So we'll get to that day.
And one other thing, the province talking about shortening up SIU investigations. Critics having concerns about that some of the investigations might not be able to be handled properly. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, I'm grateful that the government was brave enough to do what they did. And what they've done is they've struck a balance of fairness, and I appreciate that. Because, Roger, under the existing rules of engagement, I've had to deal with officers who attend a call, and I'll give you a real one, attending a suicide call. So some officers go up through the elevator, and another officer's about to go up, and then the person lands right beside them. Now all of a sudden that officer is a subject officer to an organization looking for criminal behavior. That officer had nothing to do with criminal behavior. Now he or she, they're under a dark cloud for months and months and months. Eliminate that stuff. If they feel that there's some sort of criminality to it, then sure, conduct that investigation. We want truthfulness. We want transparency. But there's so many cases where we just shouldn't simply not have been under an SIU mandate. And I'm not pointing fingers at the SIU. They have to act in accordance with the law, and they've been fine with that. And I can understand and respect that. But now altering the law so that they're not as handcuffed, and so that the true aspect of fairness is on the table, I think it's a good day for all of us.
Okay, Chief, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate
Thanks,
you coming in. We'll have more on BT coming up after the break.